Chapter 3: The Story of Indian Democracy. We are all familiar with the idea democracy is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracies fall into two basic categories: direct and representative. In a direct democracy, all citizens, without the intermediary of elected or appointed officials, can participate in making public decisions. Such a system is clearly only practical with relatively small numbers of people in a community, organization, or tribal council. For example, the local unit of trade union, where members can meet in a single room to discuss issues and arrive at decisions by consensus or majority vote. Modern society, with its size and complexity, offers few opportunities for direct democracy. Today, the most common form of democracy, whether for a town of 50,000 nation or nation of 1 billion, is representative democracy, in which citizens elect officials to make political decisions, formulate laws, and administer programs for the public good. Ours is a representative democracy. Every citizen has an important right to vote or are his representative. People elect their representatives to all levels from panchayats, municipal boards, state assemblies, and parliament. There has increasingly been a feeling that democracy ought to involve people more regularly and should not just mean casting a vote every 5 years. Both the concepts of participatory democracy and decentralized governments have thus become popular. Participatory democracy is a system of democracy in which the members of a group or a community participate collectively in the taking of major decisions. This chapter will discuss the Panchayati Raj system as an example of major initiative towards decentralized and grassroots democracy. Both the procedures as well as values that form Indian democracy have developed over the long years of India's anti-colonial struggle. In the last 70 years in independence, the success of Indian democracy has been seen as a remarkable feat for a country with such great diversity as well as inequality. This chapter cannot possibly provide a comprehensive account of its rich and complex past and present. In this chapter, we, therefore, try and provide only a synoptic view of democracy in India. We first look at the Indian Constitution, the bedrock of Indian democracy. We focus on its key values, briefly look at making of the Constitution, drawing upon some snippets of the debates representing different views. Second, we look at grassroots level of functioning democracy, namely the Panchayati Raj system. In both the expositions, you will notice that there are different groups of people representing competing interests and often also different political parties. There is an essential part of any functioning democracy. The third part of this chapter seeks to discuss how competing interests function, what the terms interest groups and political parties mean, and what their role is in a democratic system such as ours. The Indian Constitution, the core values of Indian democracy. Like so many other features of modern India, we need to begin the story about modern Indian democracy from the colonial period. We have just read about the many structural and cultural changes that British colonialism brought about deliberately. Some of the changes that came about happened in an unintended fashion. The British did not intend to introduce them. For instance, they sought to introduce Western education to create a Western educated Indian middle class that will help the colonial rulers to continue their rule. A Western educated section of Indians did emerge, but instead of aiding British rule, they used Western liberal ideas of democracy, social justice, and nationalism to challenge colonial rule. This should not, however, suggest that democratic values and democratic institutions are purely Western. For ancient epics, or diverse folk tales from one corner of the country to another are full of dialogues, discussions, and contrasting positions. Think of any folk tale, riddles, folk song, or any story from any epic that reveals different viewpoints. We just draw one for example from the epic Mahabharata. However, as you saw in chapter 1 and 2, social change in modern India is not just about Indian or Western ideas. It is a combination as well as reinterpretation of Western and Indian ideas. We saw that in the case of social reformers, we saw the use of both modern ideas of equality and traditional ideas of justice. Democracy is no exception. In colonial India, the undemocratic and discriminatory administrative practice of British colonialism contrasted sharply with the vision of freedom which Western theories of democracy espoused and which the Western educated Indians read about. The scale of poverty and intensity of social discrimination within India also led to deeper questioning of the meaning of democracy. Is democracy just about political freedom, or is it also about economic freedom and social justice? Is it also about equal rights to all, respective of caste, creed, race, and gender? And if that is so, how can such equality be realized in an unequal society? Many of these issues were thought of much before India became free. Even as India fought for its independence from British colonialism, a vision of what Indian democracy ought to look like emerged as far back as in 1928. Motilal Nehru and 8 other Congress leaders drafted a constitution for India. In 1931, the resolution at the Karachi session of the Indian Congress dwelt on how independent India's constitution should look like. The Karachi resolution reflects a vision of democracy that meant not just formal holding of elections but a substantive reworking of the Indian social structure in order to have a genuine democratic society. The Karachi resolution clearly spells out the vision of democracy that the nationalist movement in India had. It articulates the values that were further given full expression in the Indian Constitution. You will notice how the preamble of the Indian Constitution seeks to ensure not just political justice but also social and economic justice. You will likewise notice that equality is not just about political rights but also about status and opportunity. Democracy works at many levels. In this chapter, we began with the vision of Indian Constitution, for this in the bedrock upon which democracy rests in India. Significantly, the Constitution emerged from intense and open discussions with the Constituent Assembly. Thus, its vision or ideological content, as well as process of procedure by which it was formed, was democratic. The next section briefly looks at some of the debates. Constituent Assembly debates, a history. In 1939, Gandhiji wrote an article in the Harijan called The Only Way, in which he said, the Constituent Assembly alone can produce a constitution indigenous to the country and truly and fully representing the will of the people. One based on unadulterated adult franchise of both men and women. The popular demand in 1939 for a Constituent Assembly was, after several ups and downs, conceded by imperialist Britain in 1945. In July 1946, the elections were held. In August 1946, the Indian National Congress Expert Committee moved a resolution in the Constituent Assembly. This contained the declaration that India shall be a republic where the declared social, economic, and political justice will be guaranteed to all people of India. On matters of social justice, there were lively debates on whether government functions should be prescribed and the state be bound to them. Issues debated ranged from right to employment to social security, land reforms to property rights, to the organization of panchayats. Here are some snippets from the debates. Competing interests. the constitution, and social change. India exists at so many levels. The multi-religious and multicultural composition of the population with distinct streams of tribal culture is one aspect of plurality. Many divides classify the Indian people. The impact that culture, religion, and caste have on the urban rural divide, rich poor divide, and later to later divide is varied. Deeply stratified by caste and party, there are groupings and subgroupings among the rural poor. The urban working class comprises a wide range. Then there is well organized domestic business class, as also the professional and commercial class. The urban professional class is highly vocal. Competing interests operate on the Indian social scene and clamor for control of the state's resources. However, there are some basic objectives laid down in the constitution and which are generally agreed in the Indian political world as being obviously just. These would empowerment of the poor and marginalized, poverty alleviation, ending of caste and positive steps to treat all groups equally. Competing interests do not always reflect a clear class divide. Take the issue of the close down of a factory because it emits toxic waste and affects the health of those around. This is a matter of life which the constitution protects. The flip side is that the closure will render people jobless. Livelihood again is a matter of life that the constitution protects. It is interesting that at the time of drawing up of constitution, the Constituent Assembly was fully aware of this complexity and plurality, but intent on securing social justice as a guarantee. Constitutional norms and social justice interpretation to aid social justice. It is useful to understand that there is a difference between law and justice. The essence of law is its force. Law is law because it carries the means of coerce or force obedience. The power of the state is behind it. The essence of justice is fairness. Any system of laws function through a hierarchy of authorities. The basic norm from which all other rulers and authorities flow is called constitution. It is a document that constitutes a nation's tenets. The Indian constitution is India's basic norm. All other laws are made as per the procedures the constitution describes. These laws are made and implemented by the authorities specified in the constitution. A hierarchy of courts interpret the laws when there is a dispute. The Supreme Court is the highest court and the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution. The Supreme Court has enhanced the substance of fundamental rights in the Constitution in many important ways. The box illustrates a few instances. The Constitution is just not ready referencer or do's or don'ts for social justice. It has the potential for the meaning of social justice to be extended. Social movements have also aided the courts and authorities to interpret the contents of rights and principles and keeping the contemporary understanding on social justice. Laws and courts are sites where competing views are debated. The Constitution remains a means to channelize and civilize political power towards social welfare. You will realize that Constitution has the capacity to help people because it is based on basic norms of social justice. For instance, the directive principle on village panchayats was moved as an amendment in the Constituent Assembly by K. Santanam. After 40 odd years, it became a constitutional imperative after the 73rd Amendment in 1992. We shall be dealing with this in the next section. Panchayati Raj and challenges of rural social transformation. Ideals of Panchayati Raj. Panchayati Raj translates literally to governance by 5 individuals. The idea is to ensure that the village or grassroots level of functioning and vibrant democracy. While the idea of grassroots democracy is not an alien import to our country, in a society where there are sharp inequalities, Democratic participation is hindered on grounds of gender, caste, and class. Furthermore, you shall see in the newspaper reports later in the chapter, traditionally there have been caste panchayats in villages, but they have usually represented dominant groups. Furthermore, they often held conservative views and often have and continue to take decisions that go against both democratic norms and procedures. When the constitution was being drafted, panchayats did not find a mention in it. At this juncture, a member of members expressed their sorrow, anger, and disappointment over this issue. At the same time, drawing on his own rural experiences, Dr. Ambedkar argued that local elites and upper caste were so well entrenched in society that local self government only meant a continuing exploitation of the downtrodden masses of Indian society. The upper caste would no doubt silence this segment of population further. The concept of local government was dear to Gandhiji too. He envisaged each village as a self sufficient unit, conducting its own affairs, and saw Gram Swaraj to be ideal model to be continued after independence. However, only in 1992, a grassroots democracy or decentralized government was ushered in by the 73rd Constitutional Amendment. This act provided constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj institutions. It is compulsory now for local self government bodies in rural and municipal areas to be elected every 5 years. More importantly, control of local resources is given to the elected local bodies. The 73rd and 74th Amendments of the Constitution ensured a reservation of one-third of total seats for women in all elected offices of local bodies in both rural and urban areas. Out of this, 17% seats are reserved for women belonging to scheduled castes and tribes. This amendment is significant as for the first time it brought women into elected bodies, which also bestowed on them decision making powers. One third of the seats in local bodies, gram panchayats, village panchayats, municipalities, city corporations, and district boards are reserved for women. In 93 to 94 elections, soon after the 73rd Amendment brought in 800,000 women into the political processes in a single election. That was a big step indeed in enfranchising women. A constitutional amendment prescribed a three-tier system of local self-governance for the entire country, effective since 92 to 93. Power and responsibilities of panchayats. According to the constitution, panchayats should be given powers and authority to function as institutions of self-government. It thus required all state governments to revitalize local representative institutions. The following powers and responsibilities were delegated to the panchayats: to prepare plans and schemes for economic development, to promote schemes that will enhance social justice, to levy, collect, and appropriate taxes, duties, tolls, and fees, help in devolution of government responsibilities, especially that of finances, to local authorities. Social welfare responsibilities of the panchayats include the maintenance of burning and burial ground, recording statistics of birth and deaths, establishment of child welfare and maternity centers, control of cattle pounds, propagation of family planning, and promotion of agricultural activities. The development activities include the construction of roads, public buildings, wells, tanks, and schools. They also promote small cottage industry and take care of mining irrigation works. Many government schemes like the Integrated Rural Development Program and Integrated Child Development Scheme are monitored by members of the panchayat. The main income of the panchayat is from tax levied on property, profession, animals, vehicles, cess on land, revenue, and rentals. The resources are further increased by the grant received through Zilla Panchayat. It is also considered compulsory for panchayat offices to put up boards outside their offices listing the breakup of funds received and utilization of financial aid received. This exercise was taken to ensure the people at the grassroots level should have right to information opening all functioning to the public eye. People had the right to scrutinize the location of money and ask for the reason of decision that were taken for the welfare and development activities of the village. Nyaya panchayats have been constituted in some states. They possess the authority to hear some petty civil and criminal cases. They can impose fines but cannot award a sentence. These village courts have often been successful in bringing about an agreement amongst contending parties. They have been particularly effective in punishing men who harass women for dowry and perpetrate violence against them. Panchayati Raj in tribal areas. Many tribal areas have had a rich tradition of grassroots democratic functioning. We give an illustrative example from Meghalaya. All the three major ethnic tribal groups, namely the Khasis, Jaintias, and the Garos, have their own traditional political institutions that have existed for hundreds of years. These political institutions were fairly well developed and functioned at various tiers, such as the village level, clan level, and state level. For instance, in the traditional political system of the Khasis, each clan had its own council known as Darbar Kur, which was presided over the clan headman. Though there is long tradition of grassroots political institution in Meghalaya, a large chunk of tribal areas lies outside the provisions of 73rd Amendment. This may be because the concerned policy maker did not wish to interfere with the traditional tribal institutions. However, as sociologist Tilput Nogri remarks, the tribal institutions in themselves need not necessarily be democratic in its structure and functioning. Commenting on the Bhuria Committee report that went into this issue, Nogri remarks that the community's concern for the traditional tribal institution is appreciable. It fails to take stock of the complexity of the situation. For notwithstanding the strong egalitarian ethos that characterized tribal societies, the element of stratification is not altogether absent. Tribal political institutions are not only marked by open intolerance to women, but the process of social change has also introduced sharp distortion in the system, making it difficult to identify which is traditional, which is not. This again brings you the challenging nature of tradition that we discussed in chapter 1 and 2. Democratization and inequality. It will be clear to you that democratization is not easy in a society that has had a long history of inequality based on caste, community, and gender. We have dealt with the different kinds of inequality earlier in the book. In chapter 4, you will get a fuller sense of rural Indian structure. Given this unequal and democratic social structure, it is not surprising that in many cases, certain members belonging to particular groups, communities, caste of the village are not included or informed about meetings and activities of the village. The Gram Sabha members are often controlled by a small coterie of rich landlords, usually hailing from upper caste and leadent landed peasantry. They make decisions on development activities, allocate funds, leaving the silent majority as mere onlookers. The reports in the boxes below show different kind of experiences at grassroots level. One shows how traditional panchayats are being used. Another reports on how new institutions of Panchayati Raj in some cases are truly bringing in radical changes. Yet another on how democratic measures do not often work out in practice because interest groups resist change and money matters. Political parties, pressure groups, and democratic politics. You will recall that this chapter began with the oft quoted definition of democracy as a form of government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. As the chapter unfolded, you would have noticed how this definition captures the spirit of democracy but conceals divisions between one group or people or another. We have seen how interests and concerns are different. We have seen in Section 2 of the Indian Constitution how different groups sought to represent their interests within the Constituent Assembly. We also saw in the story of Indian democracy the contending interests of different groups. A look at the newspaper every morning will show you how many instances where different groups seek to make their voices heard, draw attention of the government to their grievances. The question, however, arises whether all interest groups are comparable. Can an illiterate peasant or literate worker make her case to the government as coherently and convincingly as an industrialist? Neither the industrialist nor the peasant or worker, however, represent their case as individuals. Industrialists form associations such as Federation of Indian Chambers and Commerce and Association of Chambers of Commerce. Workers from trade unions such as Indian Trade Union Congress or Center of Indian Trade Unions. Farmers form agricultural unions such as Shetkari Sangathan. Agricultural laborers have their own unions. You will read about what kind of organization and social movements like tribal and environmental movements in the last chapter. In a democratic form of government, political parties are key factors. A political party may be defined as an organization oriented towards achieving legitimate control over government through an electoral process. Political party is an organization established with the aim of achieving governmental power, using that power to pursue a specific program. Political parties are based on certain understanding of society and how it ought to be. In a democratic system of interest of different groups are also represented by political parties who take up their case. Different interest groups will work towards influencing political parties. When certain group feels that their interests are not being taken up, they may move to follow an alternative party, or they form pressure groups who lobby with the government. Interest groups are organized to pursue specific interests in the political arena, operating primarily by lobbying the members of legislative bodies. In some situations, there may be political organizations which seek to achieve power but are denied opportunity to do so through standard means. These organizations are best regarded as movement until they achieve recognition. It is obvious that all groups will not have same access to the same ability to pressurize the government. Some therefore argue the concept of pressure groups underestimate the power that dominant social groups such as class or caste or gender have in society. They feel that it would be more accurate to suggest that dominant class or classes control the state. This does not negate the fact that social movements and pressure groups also continue to play a very important role in democracy. We illustrate how these contending interests function through concrete example of development in the city of Mumbai.